Ferrari were furious for one reason. They believed Russell's pole should never have survived. Verstappen crashed. Yellow flags came out. Antonelli backed off. But Russell kept going, crossed the line, and took pole away from Leclerc and Hamilton by just a few tenths. Then the FIA cleared him. No penalty, no deleted lap, no Ferrari pole. And that is where the controversy exploded, because Ferrari did not need opinions anymore. They needed the truth hidden inside Russell's Mercedes, the throttle trace, the brake pressure, the speed through the yellow flag zone, and the exact moment he lifted before attacking again. But here is the part Mercedes should fear most. The FIA may have protected Russell's pole, but it could not hide the bigger warning. Ferrari were finally close enough for one yellow flag decision to change everything. And when Leclerc and Hamilton are fast enough to make Mercedes survive by data, not dominance, the entire championship has just entered dangerous territory. Subscribe to the channel. Austria was supposed to expose Ferrari's weakness. That was the simple story before qualifying turned into a storm. The Red Bull Ring is one of those circuits where the truth arrives quickly. It is not long enough to hide a problem. It is not complicated enough to disguise a missing engine advantage. If a car is weak on the straights, everyone sees it. If the tires are sliding, the lap time shows it. If the driver cannot trust the brakes, the stopwatch punishes him immediately. And Ferrari knew that better than anyone. The SF26 had been praised for its cornering strength. That was the part of the car that gave Leclerc and Hamilton something to believe in. Through fast turns, through loaded corners, through sections where grip matters more than raw force, Ferrari looked like a serious machine. But Austria was not just about grip. Austria was about power, acceleration, exit speed, how hard the car could launch when the driver opened the throttle. And that was exactly where Mercedes had been hurting Ferrari. So when Friday arrived, the timing screen looked painful, but not surprising. Mercedes seemed comfortable. Russell had pace. Antonelli looked strong. Ferrari looked unsettled. Leclerc wanted more grip. Hamilton felt the car locking. And the gap in qualifying conditions was more than half a second. At the Red Bull Ring, that kind of gap feels enormous. There are not enough corners to recover it gently. There's not enough lap distance to hide it behind strategy or excuses. A half-second gap at Austria is like losing the argument before the final sentence is even spoken. Inside Ferrari, that would have changed the mood. Not into panic, into urgency. Because a bad Friday can mean two very different things. It can mean the car is simply not fast enough. Or it can mean the performance is there, but trapped in the wrong setup, the wrong tire window, the wrong balance, the wrong connection between engine delivery and driver confidence. That difference matters. If the speed is missing, the weekend becomes damage limitation. If the speed is trapped, the night becomes a hunt. And Ferrari had a reason to believe there was something worth hunting. They had brought the ADUO engine update to Austria, the development step aimed directly at their power unit weakness. Publicly, Ferrari had been careful. They did not call it a revolution. They did not promise Mercedes would suddenly be in trouble. They used calm words, measured words, the kind of words a team uses when it does not want to create pressure before the stopwatch has spoken. But Formula One teams do not reveal their true ambition through press statements. They reveal it through risk. And Ferrari had taken a risk. The new engine concept was more aggressive. More heat, more pressure, more efficiency. Ferrari were trying to make the engine produce more useful performance without destroying the balance that already made the SF26 dangerous in corners. That is not a simple upgrade. It is a gamble with consequences. Think of it like asking a machine to run hotter, harder, and closer to its limit, while still expecting it to behave perfectly every time the driver touches the throttle. If it works, the car gains something it desperately needs. If it does not, the problems multiply. The rear tires feel the delivery. The cooling system feels the heat. The balance feels the change. The driver feels everything. That is why Ferrari's Friday was so important. It was the first real sign of whether the new package was ready to help, or whether it needed more understanding before it could be trusted. At first, the answer looked uncomfortable. But Ferrari did not stop at the headline time. Engineers began to search through the details. Where exactly was Leclerc losing grip? Why was Hamilton feeling the locking? Was the car sliding because the tires were not in the right temperature range, or because the balance was wrong? Was the new engine delivery giving more punch in a way that made the rear tires harder to manage? These are the questions that decide a weekend. Because in Formula One, performance is rarely one big secret. It is usually a chain of tiny truths. One tire degree, one brake setting, one throttle map, one adjustment that lets the driver open the steering a fraction earlier. One change that allows the car to stop fighting the driver and start working with him. Ferrari spent the night trying to turn Friday's alarm into Saturday's answer. And by final practice, the first clue appeared. Hamilton was suddenly much closer to Russell. The gap had collapsed. Not completely. Not enough to declare victory, but enough to change the atmosphere. Enough for the Ferrari garage to look at the timing screen differently. Enough for engineers to believe the performance had not been missing after all. It had been trapped. Leclerc still had areas to clean up, but the direction was clear. The SF26 was responding. The tires were behaving better. The new engine package was beginning to connect with the rest of the car. That is where the story becomes dangerous for Mercedes. Because a Ferrari that is lost on Friday can be ignored. A Ferrari that finds the window on Saturday cannot. And Mercedes were about to discover that the gap was not as safe as it had looked. Mercedes may have kept pole, but they also learned something uncomfortable. Ferrari were not safely behind anymore. The red cars were close enough that one yellow flag decision could define the front of the grid. Hamilton and Leclerc were close enough to put pressure on Russell before the race even began. That is the hidden danger for Mercedes. The FIA decision protected the pole, but did not protect Mercedes from Ferrari's progress. Ferrari still had the lap time. They still had the upgrade data. They still had the confidence from Saturday. They still had two drivers near the front, both with reasons to attack. Leclerc had delivered a lap that reminded Ferrari he could respond under pressure. Hamilton had shown that the SF26 was beginning to suit him when the window opened. Vasseur had seen enough to know the car was no longer just a hopeful project. It was becoming a weapon, and an angry weapon is dangerous. The challenge for Ferrari was controlling that anger, because fury can help or destroy a race. If Leclerc and Hamilton became impatient, Russell could escape. If Ferrari made strategy emotional, Mercedes could turn the controversy into victory. But if Ferrari used the anger correctly, it could become focus, pressure, relentless pace, a race-long message that the FIA decision did not end the fight. That is what Mercedes had to fear on Sunday. Not just the Ferrari car, the mood behind it. A team that believes it should have started first and second does not approach the race like a team satisfied with second and third. It approaches the race like something must be corrected. And at Austria, correction is possible but not easy. Track position matters. Clean air matters. Tire temperature matters. Following a car can hurt the tires, especially in heat. If Russell controlled the start, he could force Ferrari into a difficult race. But if Leclerc or Hamilton stayed close enough, the pressure would build quickly. Ferrari's tire management could become important. If the SF26 treated its tires better than Mercedes over a stint, then Russell's pole would not guarantee peace. Ferrari could pressure him into using more tire early, then attack later when the car ahead started to slide. That is the racing layer beneath the controversy. Pole gives you the first move. It does not guarantee the final answer. And Ferrari had every reason to believe the final answer was still open. But the biggest consequence was not limited to Sunday. Austria changed the emotional relationship between Ferrari, Mercedes, and the FIA. Ferrari now knew that when the fight is this close, it cannot afford to be quiet. Mercedes knew that every marginal moment would be attacked. The FIA knew that every yellow flag involving the front runners would be placed under a microscope. That is what happens when the gap shrinks. When one team dominates, these moments fade faster. People argue, then move on. But when the cars are separated by tenths, one lift of the throttle becomes a championship debate. One martial sector becomes a battlefield. One decision becomes the story of the weekend. Austria showed that Ferrari had reached that level. They were fast enough to be furious. That is the key. Slow teams complain, and people forget. Fast teams complain, and the paddock listens. Ferrari were furious because they believed the ruling cost them something real. Not a fantasy, not a distant chance. A front-row opportunity at a circuit where they were supposed to suffer. That is why the anger was so intense and why the FIA clearing Russell did not end the story. It only confirmed the split. The official truth was that Russell had reduced speed enough under a single yellow, and his pole was allowed to stand. Ferrari's truth was that the moment still looked wrong because the danger was visible. One Mercedes had backed out, and their best qualifying result had been taken away by a lap that survived on interpretation. Mercedes' truth was that rules are rules, and the data protected their driver. The paddock's truth was that the title fight had just become more volatile. And that is the final point. This was not just about Russell. It was about what Ferrari had become. On Friday, they looked exposed. On Saturday, they looked dangerous. By the time the FIA cleared Russell, Ferrari had already learned that the SF26 could fight Mercedes in Austria. The update had worked. The drivers had responded. The gap had shrunk. That knowledge does not disappear because a stewarding decision goes against you. If anything, it makes the next fight sharper. Ferrari left Austria qualifying furious, but not empty-handed. They left with anger, pace, and proof that Mercedes could be pressured on a track that should have suited them. That combination is what changes a season. Russell kept the pole. The FIA cleared him. Mercedes survived the controversy. But Ferrari discovered something more dangerous than a grid position. They discovered that their frustration now comes from being close enough to win. And once Ferrari is close enough to win, every decision, every lap, every flag, and every tenth becomes part of a much bigger war.